Hi, and welcome to revision of the demographic transition model. Now, I'm going to move through this fairly rapidly, and I'll deal with it stage by stage. So I would advise you listen to my comments on stage 1, and then perhaps pause the video to either take some notes or to try and mind map some of the main points. The first thing to know is that there are 4 stages to the demographic transition model. They represent either time passing in one country or perhaps represent different countries today. And I'll give examples of those countries as we go along. There could also be a projected stage 5 in the graph. You may see this, and we'll talk about stage 5 when we get to that point. Okay, so the first thing to know is that there are 3 lines on the demographic transition model. The orange line is total population. The green line here is the death rate, and the purple line is the birth rate. In the exam, these will be labelled for you. The first thing you need to know how to do is to describe. Describing the graph is very straightforward. You just need to be able to make 3 accurate statements about what the lines on the graph are doing. For example, in stage 1, you could say, there is a low stable population. The words low and stable together give this a very definite description. There is a high birth rate and a high but fluctuating death rate. That's 3 good descriptions. You can consider that to be 3 marks. Now to explain these. Well, in stage 1, this would be Scotland in around about the 1700s, or, well, there are no real countries around today that are still in stage 1. Some people might argue that there are, but for my money, you're looking at tribal societies these days. Perhaps Amerindians living in the Amazon rainforest might fit the model of stage 1. The high birth rate is due to a complete lack of contraception and family planning. Also in stage 1, children would have been expected to work the land or to care for the elderly. Also, there's a very high infant mortality rate, meaning that there has to be a high birth rate to replace children who have died. So that's several reasons why there's a high birth rate. The high yet fluctuating death rate, well, that's largely due to disease. However, it's worth expanding on that point slightly in stage 1 to talk about the fluctuating nature of the death rate. Here you can score an exclamation mark unique to stage 1. The fluctuations are largely due to things like conflict or perhaps climatic issues. Climatic problems have led to a bad harvest, and in the years of bad harvest you see a peak in the death rate. That would explain the fluctuations that you see in the death rate. Moving on to the low stable population, that can be explained by the fact that the high birth rate is cancelled out by the high death rate. Therefore, the population doesn't really go anywhere. It remains low and it doesn't climb. So you can explain all 3 of the lines, and in so doing, let's say you chose one of the explanatory points for each of the descriptions. That would be 6 marks. 3 descriptions plus 3 explanations. This question is likely to be out of maybe 10 marks, something in that region, and it's easy to see how you can quickly build them up. The key thing is not to repeat yourself. Let's move on to stage 2. In stage 2, there is a rapid rise in the population. The birth rate drops slightly but remains high, and there is a rapid fall in the death rate. Again, these are 3 very sound descriptions that would be awarded marks. Let's start off with the rapid rise in population. Well, that's taken place because the rapid fall in the death rate, the difference between, the death rate and the birth rate, means there is a very high rate of natural increase. Essentially, there are less people dying and still very high numbers of people being born, so the population increases. Why is there a fall in the death rate? Well, in this stage of the demographic transition model, you might be looking at Britain in the 1800s. Alternatively, you could refer to a country such as the Democratic Republic of Congo in around about the 1990s. Here, you're seeing levels of nutrition improving. Therefore, people have a higher resistance to disease because they have the calories to fight it off. Provision of clean water will have improved, meaning that the transmission of disease has lessened. Basic sanitation might have been introduced. There's 3 good reasons why the death rate may have fallen. The birth rate will drop slightly, perhaps due to increased urbanization. This means that people may have started to move towards industrialized jobs in cities, therefore requiring smaller families. Perhaps improvements in sanitation and nutrition have meant that the infant mortality rate has dropped, and therefore people don't feel the need to have quite so many children to ensure that some survive. Stage 3. The population continues to rise. There's a rapid drop in the birth rate, and the death rate continues to drop, but begins to stabilise. Now in stage 3, what we're dealing with here is Britain in kind of 1870 on to midway through the 1900s, something like that. In other words, Britain is fully industrialised. Now, in stage 3, if you want another example, you could choose a country like perhaps Algeria, Morocco in the present day. In stage 3, we see a rapid drop in the birth rate. This is largely due to the introduction of contraception, family planning, wider education, increasing aspiration specifically amongst females who become aware of the fact that they are employable and that there are jobs available for females, and therefore perhaps having children isn't the only future option. The birth rate also drops, perhaps due to better healthcare. You could talk about in Britain the introduction of free healthcare. Remember, not all countries have free healthcare, so that's a case study example specific to those countries that do have it. And that would account for the continued drop in the death rate and indeed its stabilisation. Moving on to stage 4. In stage 4, what we see is the population is high, but it's stabilised. And that the birth rate has dropped below the death rate, resulting in an ageing population. Now, there are two and a bit descriptions there. The explanations here are interesting because in a stage 4 country like present-day Scotland, what we're seeing here is the fact that the healthcare has got so good, the diet has become, the available nutrition is of such a good quality, water is of guaranteed purity, that the death rate has dropped below the birth rate. This can also be explained by the fact that families no longer want to have children. This is because children have become an economic burden. Family sizes have decreased because people, of course, no longer need children to work for them, but they also don't need children to care for them. In fact, many people, through family planning, may be electing not to have children at all, again coming back to the expense of having children. This combined with the falling death rate, so what this means is where you have fewer babies being born and people living longer. What this results in is an aging population, but also possibly a decreasing population. It's useful if you can talk about this concept, especially if the graph moves into stage 5, where you might be asked to speculate what will happen in stage 5. And you need to be able to talk about aging populations and what might happen if the population shrinks. Well, aging populations have their own unique set of problems, about which there is more detail elsewhere on the Geography Geeks website. The shrinking population would lead to an increase in governmental policies encouraging migration. There are other points you can mention. If you check your notes, you'll see there are things I've not mentioned, mainly because I don't want to talk for too great a length of time. The key thing to take on board with this question is don't repeat yourself. You've got more than enough to say. And look at the breakdown of marks. If this was, let's say, a 12-mark question, which is about as many marks as you could possibly get for it, you're going to score 5-ish, somewhere in that region, for descriptions, leaving you with 7 marks required for explanations. Split those 7 marks across however many stages of the demographic transition model the question requires you to talk about, which is perhaps 3 stages. Maybe they don't want you to talk about stage 4. And that still means you only need 2 reasonable explanations for each stage, plus an extra explanation somewhere in amongst those 3. So it's really not a daunting question, and it's one that you can do very well in if you try. So I hope that was helpful, and if you've got any questions, come and find me. And as I say, when you review this clip, you might want to break it down into its stages. It's important that you're able to give examples of countries at each stage. Okay, I hope that helped.